And the global warming, as I say, is one big scam they came up with. Now, back in the 1920s, you'll see that the scientists then were doing the same thing. They were screaming that all the Arctic the ice was melting, and that around the Bering Strait you could sail from one country to another where normally there was ice. Well, it came back in the late 20s through the 30s and all the rest of it. It came back so much that initially the same experts said we're coming into an ice age. So we went from a warming period into an ice age. And I've read this article before. It's very important to show you that this is part of an agenda of chaos, really, to get you to give up your rights. Because they mention some of the things they plan to do to offset it, including taking over the food supply of the world, because they thought it was going to be an ice age. And this is Wednesday, December the 16th, Washington's blog. And I'll read from this. It's a very good article when I come back from this break. Hi folks, I'm Alan Watts, and this is Cutting Through the Matrix. Just talking about the cons we've tried over the last century, in fact, to get us to give up so many rights, but it's also training us to listen to experts. Remember what Bertrand Russell said? He said, we're training the public now so that they will be able to do nothing by themselves. They'll need the advice of an expert. And when he said that, it was an awful long time ago, he said, eventually mothers won't be able to change diapers without expert advice. And that happened. I mean, that has happened. Even on weather channels now, they'll tell you what to wear because it's going to rain, like you're a little child or something. And we get used to this. We get used to this being perpetual children, that we can't think for ourselves. But getting back to this article, Washington's blog, December 16th, 2009, here's what they said, and I've read it before. It's such a good article. Scientists considered pouring soot over the Arctic in the 1970s to help melt the ice in order to prevent another ice age. And it says, on April 28, 1975, Newsweek wrote an article stating climatologists are pessimistic that political leaders will take any positive action to compensate for the climatic change or even to allay its effect. The exact stuff you're hearing now. They concede that some of the more spectacular solutions proposed, such as melting the Arctic ice cap by covering it with black soot or diverting Arctic rivers, might create problems far greater than those they solve. This is what they thought about, diverting the rivers and everything. But the scientists see few signs that the government leaders anywhere are even prepared to take the simple measures of stockpiling food or of introducing the variables of climatic uncertainty into economic projections of future food supplies. Now, we see them do the same thing now as they take the seeds and put them off to islands that are inaccessible to the general public because of global warming, supposedly. Any excuse will do to get their way. It says the longer planners delay, the more difficult will they find it to cope with climatic change once the results become grim reality. And they give you a reprint of the article in the Washington Times and also a copy of the 1975 Newsweek article. It says, why were scientists considering melting the ice cap? Because they were worried about a new ice age. Newsweek discussed the 75 article back again in 2006 and said, in April 75, Newsweek published a small back-paged article about a very different kind of disaster, citing ominous signs that the Earth's weather patterns have begun to change dramatically. The magazine warned of an impending drastic decline in food production. Political disruptions stemming from food shortages could affect just about every nation on Earth. Scientists urged governments to consider emergency action to head off the terrible threat of, well, if you haven't been following the climate change debates at the time, you'd have known that the threat was global cooling. Citizens can judge for themselves what constitutes a prudent response, which, Indeed, it's what occurred 30 years ago. All in all, it's probably just as well that society elected not to follow one of the possible solutions mentioned in the Newsweek article, which was to pour soot, black soot, carbon, you see, over the Arctic ice cap to help it melt. Newsweek was not alone. Some scientists in the press have been warning about an ice age off and on for over 100 years. For example, on February 24, 1895, the New York Times published an article called Prospects of Another Glacial Period. Geologists think the world may be frozen up again, which starts with the following paragraph. The question is again being discussed whether recent and long-continued observations do not point to the advent of a second glacial period, while the countries now basking in the fostering warmth of a tropical sun will ultimately give way to the perennial frosts and snow of the polar regions. In 1958, Harper's Magazine wrote an article called The Coming Ice Age. On January 11, 1970, the Washington Post wrote an article entitled Colder Winters Held Dawn of New Ice Age. Scientists see Ice Age in the future, which stated, get a good grip on your long johns, cold weather haters. The worst may be yet to come. That's the long-range weather forecast being given out by climatologists, the people who study very long-term world weather trends. And it goes on and on and on as they try to get us all to give up our rights and put all foods and handling and growing of food into the government's hands because of a coming ice age, just like they're trying to do with the coming warming age that seems to have gone back to an ice age again according to this winter. So that's the farce, as I say, that we certainly do live through. It just goes on and on, doesn't it? Now, the BBC has the Met Office, that's their weather office, a big organisation for the BBC. And it's totally on board, of course, with the New World Order because the BBC works for the British government. It's paid for by the tax money and it has political agendas. Always has had. It was set up, in fact, to be the propaganda arm of the British parliamentary system. And nothing has changed. This article here is from the BBC on the 16th of January to do with its weather department. It's all for the global warming. It's a rah-rah team for global warming and all that stuff. And it's by Roger Harabin. It says, the UK Met Office is debating what to do with its long-term and seasonal forecasting after criticism for failing to predict extreme weather. These are the guys who are the experts, right? They're all on board with global warming. And have failed to predict the extreme weather that Britain and Europe's going through right now. Some experts say the Met Office should stop longer-term statistical projections forecasting because it damages the organisation's reputation. Why? Because they're always wrong. They're always wrong. Others maintain that the communication of the forecast must be improved. The Met Office has been criticised for failing to predict in its seasonal forecasts the UK would suffer this cold winter for the last 3 wet summers, or the last 3 wet summers. They didn't predict any of them. After being rapped for its now notorious barbecue summer that never happened, right? They got pouring rain. Press release. The winter forecast was expressed in probabilistic terms, and what they told the public was there'd be a 66% likelihood that the winter would be warmer than average. Here they are under the worst freezing snow in 20 years, and has now admitted to BBC News that its annual global mean forecast predicted temperatures higher than actual temperatures for 9 years out of the last 10. 9 out of 10 is wrong. It says the warming bias is very small. This is their excuse. Just 0.5 degrees centigrade. And the Met Office points out that the variance between the forecast and the actual temperatures is within its own stated margins of error. So they can police themselves and pop it within its own margins of error. As I say, we live through incredible farces, don't we? And that's what I'm saying about what do you pick for the meat? What do you pick to read on a show like this when there's so much farce out there, except more farce?